If you've ever thought about optimizing human performance and health, then you're going to love this episode of Life Excellence. Dave Pascoe is a biohacker and longevity athlete who, at the age of 63, looks, feels, and performs like a 40-year-old. That's because, according to epigenetic age testing, Dave's biological age is 43. Dave ranks among the top contenders on the Longevity World Cup leaderboard and the leaderboard of the Rejuvenation Olympics with a best pace of aging of 0.66. What this means is that Dave only ages 8 months every year. For most of 2023, that pace placed him ahead of Bryan Johnson, the famous tech billionaire who spends $2 million a year attempting to reverse the aging process. As you'll learn in our conversation today, Dave's approach to biohacking and longevity is quite a bit more affordable and more attainable to the average person than Bryan Johnson's regimen. And we're going to find out from Dave what we can all do to improve our health, fitness, and vitality. Dave has been featured in the Wall Street Journal, New York Post, and Germany's Bild newspaper. He has been a guest on Ben Greenfield's Boundless Life podcast in Launch City interviews and has spoken at various biohacker and longevity events, including the Time Pi Longevity Forum, RadFest, and Biohackers World Conference and Expo. Dave freely shares all his routines and the products he uses to stay young and fit, and you can find volumes of information at his website, davepascoe.net. I've really been looking forward to this conversation, and it's such an honor to have him on the show. Welcome, Dave, and thanks for joining us on Life Excellence.
Hey, Brian, thank you so much for having me. And wow, that was such a great intro. There's nothing left for us to talk about. I think you just pretty much wrapped the whole thing.
Well, we actually have a few other things to talk about, so let's jump right into it.
All right.
Dave, the concept of longevity has been around for a long time, and biohacking actually has too, although it's certainly become more universally known in the last few years. How did you discover these concepts, and when did you first get intentional about slowing the aging process?
Wow. That could go back decades, but I think when it really hit in for me was, probably around 2012. I was training for my first marathon, and I thought I was doing everything right back then. I was eating really good. I thought my sleep was good. I was exercising a lot. I was following all the logic and the wisdom of the day of what was healthy. Right? I thought I looked good. I thought I felt good. And so I heard of this test called a telomere test. It was on one of the podcasts I was following at the time. Actually, it was a blog. I think it was Ben Greenfield's blog originally, because I was trying to become a better runner because I really sucked at running. And so in his podcast or his blog, he was talking about this thing called telomeres, which they're like little separators between our chromosomes that get shorter every time a cell divides. And at some point, the cell then becomes no longer viable and we die. It's why there's a theoretical 120-year limit to our lifespans. And so I heard of this test, and I thought I would take this test to see what it would say about my telomeres, because I thought for certain it was going to tell me that I had the telomeres of a 23-year-old. And I had just turned 50. But much to my surprise, no, that was not the result that I got back. It told me I had the telomeres of a 68-year-old. And I was horrified because I thought, wait a minute, what am I doing wrong? Here again, I thought I was doing everything correct, but I was obviously missing something huge. And that's what made me start doing a deep dive into cellular mechanisms, biology. And of course, I did a consult with the company to find out what they could tell me about my telomeres. To my surprise, they asked me questions like, what was my lifestyle? And, I understood at the time that, exercise and nutrition and sleep had everything to do with lifestyle, but they wanted to know more. They wanted to know what my everyday life was like, which I thought was kind of odd. So I decided to play along. And I said, well, yeah, I have a really stressful job. I'm a network security architect and engineer. And, if there's a breach in the network, or if I have upgrades that I have to make globally to firewalls, I could be awake for 36 hours at a stretch sometimes, if need be. I'm training for my first marathon. I also do P90X, which is a really, stressful, extreme workout program from the 90s. And oh yeah, by the way, I'm the sole caretaker for both of my parents who have cancer. And they're like, whoa, wait, stop. Okay, we've seen this before. We've seen shorter telomeres in type A personalities with very stressful jobs. We've seen it in high endurance athletes, triathletes, for example, who just push so hard physically that it the stress shortens their telomeres. And we've seen it in the caretakers of elderly parents. It's stressful. And they said, you, my friend, have the trifecta. You're just going from one stress to the next stress to the next stress, and you're killing yourself with stress. And I was kind of shocked because I'd never really thought about it that way. I thought that by doing all these different things, I was relieving myself of the stress of work or the stress of taking care of my parents, or just the stress of life. But I never was coming down from any of those stresses. So they recommended things like yoga, meditation, things that I used to do all the time, but just forgot because life got in the way. And so I had to start picking up those practices again, just to learn to chill out. But then also I had to learn to reframe how I looked at life. So, for example, I hated running. I was only running because our church was, getting together first-time runners to run a marathon, to raise money, to build wells, to build wells in Africa because there's kids that are dying of disease-ridden water, thousands by the day. And so we thought it was a worthy cause. And I thought it would be great to learn how to be a marathoner from some expert marathoners that were going to usher us in and be mentors to us. But I hated running. I was terrible at running. I'm still terrible at running. And to me, running was a chore. But I was running by a hospital one day, and I was doing a thought experiment. I like doing thought experiments. And I imagined as I was looking up at the hospital windows as I was running by that I was a patient in that hospital. And all I could do was lay there in bed, look out the window, and I see this guy out running on the street, and I'm wishing that I could be out there doing that rather than being stuck here in this bed. And as I'm going through this thought experiment, it occurs to me, I am that guy. I don't have to run. I'm blessed. I get to run. Right? And that whole thought process was a revelation to me at the time. It changed the way I looked at running. It was no longer then a chore. It was a blessing. It was a gift. It was something I got to do. And then using that mindset, it helped me to look at my job in a better way. It helped me to look at taking care of my parents in a much better way. I mean, I knew both weren't going to be around forever, right? My parents weren't going to be around forever. My job wasn't going to be around forever. I had to look at the fact that I was going to be retiring at some point, and my parents would eventually pass of the cancers that they were battling. And so I had to focus more on the gift that I was given to be with them until their final days and to be able to make them, comfortable. And that took away a lot of the stress that I was dealing with. So stress, obviously, is a big indicator of a shorter lifespan. And by further testing while I was doing the Rejuvenation Olympics experimentation, I found that my more stressful times lended to my higher paces of aging.
It's interesting to hear you talk about stress relief because I think, you mentioned earlier that you were running, you were exercising, and I think the common misconception is that if you, especially if you have stress, maybe as long as you're exercising, you sort of counteract that. And we now know, because I think awareness is increased, especially for people who are into fitness, into health, that now there's more talk about longevity. There's more talk about biohacking. There's more talk about things like mindset, which you mentioned, and sleep. And I'm really committed to health and fitness. And because I know you, I've been tangentially aware of this increased focus on biohacking. But I think for the general population, Bryan Johnson and his story has maybe single-handedly put the industry on a map, and on the map. And I think maybe he was responsible for sort of jump-starting it. But I know folks like you and many others are now involved in the longevity movement, in biohacking. And by the way, I mentioned Bryan Johnson a couple times. For those who don't know, Bryan Johnson is a billionaire who founded the mobile payment company Braintree, which acquired a little company called Venmo, which of course we all know now, and then sold that company in 2013 to PayPal for $800 million. And Johnson, to make it's long story about his health and deterioration of health, but basically got obsessed with reversing the aging process, and then launched his career with a whole bunch of financial backing from the sale of this company as a professional rejuvenation athlete. And it's interesting to me because it's evolved to the point where, and I'm interested in your take on this particular point, that Johnson is now suggesting his generation could become the first generation that doesn't die. And of course, he has a Netflix documentary called Don't Die, The Man Who Wants to Live Forever. And Dave, I have so many questions about his methodology and about what it actually takes in terms of time, money, and effort to create the results he's creating, and also the results that you and others who are very involved in this biohacking industry and longevity movement, who are investing far less money to create those results. You're retired. You mentioned your systems background, and you're retired from that now. And Bryan Johnson, as I mentioned, sold his company 13 years ago, I guess. So you both have a considerable amount of discretionary time. And I'm curious, how much time per day or week, if you measure it on a weekly basis, do you actually spend on training and everything else that you do to optimize health? Because I know there's so much packed into it. I've looked at your website, and we'll talk more about that later, which is just chock full of not only your routine, but it's a virtual encyclopedia or reservoir for how to reverse aging, stall aging, and be in better fitness and better health, better mindset, all of those things. How much time a day or a week are you investing in this?
Well, so I have to chuckle a little bit because, Bryan, I didn't even know who he was. I had been biohacking or doing what I've been doing for at least a decade before Bryan came on the scene. And I didn't know there was a competition when I ended up beating him on the Rejuvenation Olympics. I guess when he came on the scene, he just assumed that he was the only one on the planet doing what he was doing because he was spending so much money at it. And so he created the competition and made himself number one on the leaderboard. But then I'm looking at my latest result because I was already using True Diagnostic for several years before he was. And I was looking at my latest result thinking, is this right? I'm actually beating this guy. And that's when I submitted my results, and he moved down to number 7, and I was number 6 for all of 2023. But Bryan's kind of a baby biohacker. I know for better or for worse, he's captured a lot of public attention for the things that he's doing. But the things that he's doing, you don't need to do to be able to have a slower pace of aging or to keep yourself in good shape. He's learning the hard way, and he's still getting there. But many of us know that there are better ways. And so, for example, the last maybe 10 years of my career, I had automated a lot of my job. And I started spending my spare time listening to podcasts, reading books, pretty much consuming every bit of information that I could gather from the internet, PubMed research, everywhere, everything I could get a hold of. From the moment I would wake up to the time I went to bed, I was listening to podcasts or reading books on Audible, or listening to books on Audible, and trying to understand how I could apply that to my life. And of course, I did a lot of advanced stuff, and Bryan's done a lot of advanced stuff too. I mean, we've both done, sauna, hyperbaric, plasmapheresis, or in my case, I donate plasma because paying $10,000 a pop to get your plasma exchange is a little out of my price range, but I found that donating plasma works just the same, and they pay me for that. But all of that stuff didn't really move the needle for me until I went back and started looking at how am I really addressing the fundamentals, the basics. And once I did that, that's when my pace of aging scores started getting really good. And so when I say fundamentals, I mean, these are the things that everybody can and probably should be doing. And number one would be to try to avoid and eliminate the toxins in our lives. Now, I know that this sounds silly. I think if at one point in my life, someone had told me that there were toxins in our life that we had to avoid, I would have thought they were a little nuts, to be honest with you. But now I really do understand that, most of our personal care products, like our toothpaste, our shampoos, our cosmetics, our deodorants, all these things have so many chemicals, foreign chemicals in them that our body is absorbing and having to fight off. And that steals tons of resources that our body would normally use to do its natural regeneration. And so, trying to clean up our air, our water, again, our food, trying to avoid pesticides and herbicides and, oh gosh, what else? I mean, there's so many things that get added into our food system, including antibiotics in our meats, synthetic hormones that are in the meats. We have endocrine disruptors. I mean, there's so many things. And so cleaning up our diet, getting rid of all of those things. So that's number one, eliminating all the bad things that are harming us that we don't even realize are bad. Junk food, of course, bad, right? It's empty nutrition. It's not useful. So focusing then on really good nutrition, going for optimal nutritional density, optimal nutritional diversity, trying to get a good gut microbiome going, because our microbiome tends to break things down and help to give us supplements and things that our body needs to produce on its own, but may be failing. And again, as we get older, our body stops producing or slows down in producing some of the things we need to stay younger. So that leads to supplementation. So we covered toxins, avoiding toxins. We covered nutrition. Supplementation now is another thing that we need to do. They say that most of the foods that we eat now don't contain the same amount of nutrition that they used to, say, 50 years ago. And I do tend to believe that. Sleep is so important. Sleep is the time that our body does most of its repair. And it's the time that our brain does its repair and regeneration. Movement is another key. I think that's probably number 5. It's so important because if you think about it, our cells are living creatures, right? They have to eat and they have to excrete their wastes. So the nutrients that we take in, they get broken down, they get delivered to the cells, via the bloodstream in tiny little capillaries. These capillaries, though, don't touch every cell. They just kind of go in between the cells. And so they release their nutrients into this, if you can imagine, this interstitial fluid that bathes all of our cells. And then our cells selectively uptake these nutrients through their membranes. They pull in what they need, they consume that, and then they release their wastes in the same manner, right out through the same membrane into that interstitial fluid. But most of the wastes don't get carried away through the bloodstream. Some do. The ones that are small enough can be reabsorbed back through the bloodstream. But larger, molecules have to be carried away somehow. And we don't have a pump for our lymphatic system like, the heart pumps blood. The only way that lymph fluid gets moved in our body is through either manual massage or muscle movement. So really, if you think about this, we are so sedentary these days, right? We're in bed for 8 hours a day where we don't move. We get up in the morning, we sit, we eat breakfast or drink our coffee. We sit in a car and drive to work, where we sit some more for about 8 hours a day. We come home, we sit for dinner, we sit in front of the TV, and then we go back to bed again. And so we're not moving like our ancestors used to do. And if you're not moving every muscle in your body all day long, every day, then the cells in those areas of the body that aren't being moved are basically just kind of stewing in their own waste. It builds up, it accumulates. And if you think about it, over years that we do this, that waste builds up so that we're not just starving ourselves of nutrients that can't get through, we're also poisoning them with our own waste because of our lack of movement. And then there's a thing called intercellular communication. Like, all of our cells communicate to each other individually and via organ systems to keep a coordination between them in our body. And if this gunk keeps building up, it blocks that communication signal from getting through. And the lack of, that communication is one of the known pillars of aging. So movement is extremely important. I think you probably heard the saying that, sitting is the new smoking. They don't really explain why, but hopefully my explanation of why really drives it home that we need to be up and moving like as much as possible.
I asked you about time, and I was going to ask you about money. Again, Bryan Johnson spending $2 million a year reportedly, you spending, investing a reported $30,000 a year. But as I hear you talk, it sounds to me like it's more about intentionality than it is either time or money. Not that that it doesn't take time to move. Not that it doesn't take money for supplements or maybe for a higher quality food, but it is the most important part of it, the intentionality around learning how it is that we ought to be living in order to either stall aging or even just enhance the quality of our lives from a health standpoint, from a vitality standpoint.
I would say absolutely, because the biggest levers of longevity are free. They're the intentional things I just talked about, the avoiding toxins, trying to get good nutrition, optimizing your sleep, making sure that you're moving throughout the day. Those are free. Anybody can do those, but we have to be very intentional about doing those.
Dave, what does success look like to you? So is it more years? Is it living longer than you would otherwise live? Is it better quality of life and lifestyle, or is it something else? How do folks who are playing at the level that you are and competing even in longevity contests, what does success look like?
It's funny you should ask that, because as a kid, I was always trying to model what the successful people around me were doing. I had a lot of questions as a kid, and my parents had no patience for questions, especially from a kid. And so I had to model the successful people in my life. So, for example, I would see, couples that would, fight like cats and dogs, didn't seem to get along at all. And you had other couples that had been married for, decades that were still holding hands, would gaze into each other's eyes, and, were just best friends. And so I wanted to see what were those people doing versus what were the people doing that just didn't seem to like one another, but were stuck with each other, because I didn't want that kind of relationship. I wanted the kind of relationship that the happy people were having. And I saw that there were, very wealthy people, and yet there were people that didn't seem to have much at all. And I wanted to know, what are these wealthy people doing? Why aren't we doing that, right? Why isn't everybody doing that? And then I also saw that for, aging. I saw very old people that gosh, they were just amazing. They could do everything. They were out, running marathons. They were out gardening. They were just having a good time and enjoying life. And then I would see people, half or a quarter of their age that were just very broken down and disease ridden. And again, I wanted to say, I wanted to know, what is it that the successful old people were doing so that I could mirror that myself. So success to me means doing, just human optimization all the way around. Everything that can be done expertly. Success leaves clues, as Tony Robbins and Jim Rohn like to say. Follow what the experts do and do that. To me, that's success.
Well, and I think you've touched on something that's very simple and yet profound, and this notion of modeling success. It's one of the fundamental principles in my life, and we have lots of parallels, and I don't think we have the same biological age, so that's where the parallels stop. But we're certainly interested in learning and growing and improving our lives. And it's really one of the simplest things that we can do in any area of life, whether you mention relationships or wealth or health or fitness or spirituality or personal development, any area of life. If we just look at people who are successful, like you mentioned, the folks who are madly in love and they've been married 70 years. And if we model those same behaviors, then it's interesting, and it's not rocket science, right? If we model the behaviors of financially successful people, just fundamental things like spending less than you earn, and again, just really basic things that we don't always practice in our world today for lots of reasons, and that's a whole different discussion. But if we do those same things, it's interesting that we can achieve those same results. And the corollary to that, the other part, is we can see people who are, and you mentioned it, the couples who aren't getting along, and we see what they're doing that's causing them to not get along, and then make the decision to not do those things. And it's interesting how that enhances our relationships too. So very simple, very profound. Dave, I've heard you refer to your body as a prized racehorse or a high-end performance vehicle. Say more about that. I think I know what you mean, but I'd like to hear you explain that.
Well, it's funny because I don't really think in those terms. That was me trying to explain it in terms of other people and what they find valuable. Because I know that, people spend a lot of money on racehorses. They will give them everything. They will have special trainers, and they will give them massages, special supplements. I mean, they'll soak and invest millions into a racehorse, or, a high performance vehicle. People will keep that car in the garage, and they'll polish it, and they'll keep it looking great. They'll replace any part that goes bad. I just wondered, why don't we do this for ourselves? Because this body that we get, it's the only one we're ever going to have. So why don't we take care of it as though it were some prized possession? Because it is a prized possession to us. Nobody in the world is going to care more for our body, this vessel that we travel through life in, than ourselves. And if we're not intentional about that, we just let it fall apart, and we're not doing the regular maintenance on it, it's going to crumble. It's not going to last as long as it should. And I saw that with my parents, right? I mean, my parents were great examples for me. They didn't exercise. They smoked. They drank. They didn't eat right. Never worked out, right? I mean, they were an experiment to me, as were many other people in my life, again, watching the people that were successful, but also watching the people that I could tell were not following the advice or the path of successful people, and seeing how it was going to turn out for them. And frankly, I don't want to repeat what my parents did. I don't want to spend the last 20 plus years of my life with cancer, with every ailment under the sun, living terribly. There's no reason for that. It's absolutely pointless when we could, if we took care of ourselves properly, live healthfully till the very day that we drop. I'm not trying to live forever. I know Bryan Johnson, that's his goal. He wants to live forever. That does not interest me one bit. I'm I'm a man of faith, like I know you are. We're all going to go home at some point. I just want to make sure that I honor this temple, that I honor this body that God gifted me with right up until the very end. And to me, that's living a good life.
I was going to ask you about that. And so do you consider that stewardship of your body? Because again, we can get into the whole faith discussion and the incongruity, if that's a word, just you look at the never die movement, and obviously that runs contrary to God's design for our lives. The notion that God already knows when the day is going to come, and that's already been planned, and we can't do anything to change that. So for you, is it stewardship of your prized racehorse or your amazing high performance vehicle? And how does that is that a faith decision, or how does faith enter into it? What role does that play?
It's kind of all of the above. I can't say it's just one thing or just another. It's all of them combined. I mean, I get a kick out of seeing myself getting better as I'm getting older, mainly because I haven't subscribed to this delusion that I think most of the world has, that we have to get old, that we have to break down, that it's inevitable. I mean, sure, some degree of it is, but I think what we've mistakenly come to believe is natural aging is not natural at all. It's just, again, the fact that we're poisoning ourselves, with the toxicity that we take in. We're not sleeping well. We're not getting the right nutrition. We're not moving to clear away those wastes. I mean, all of that, again, it all ties back in together. And so I find that as I'm getting older, I continue to get better. Like when I do races, my times are improving, even though, I sucked initially. I still suck by most measures. I'm terrible, but I'm improving. I'm continuing to improve.
Your attitude around it does, that's for sure. I mean, maybe if you, what would it look like if you reframed that, Dave?
No, I'm just, I'm not being too hard on myself. I'm just trying to be a realist. I mean, compared to many other people, I'm not good, right? I'm not the smartest guy in any room, but I will gladly outwork everyone. That's my mindset, work hard, do my best. I'm not in competition with anybody but myself. And so the fact that I can keep seeing improvements in every aspect of my physical performance at this age tells me that I'm on the right track, that there's no reason why we should have to get all broken down. We just have to try a little harder.
Yes.
When I run, I burn muscle and I break down. But then when run season's over, I go through a rebuilding phase where I'm putting muscle back on. And at my age, it keeps getting harder and harder, but it's not impossible. It just involves a little more effort.
Well, and you're right. It starts with intentionality and effort, and obviously knowledge about how that works, and then doing the things you need to do to be successful. Again, it gets back to that modeling success. Yeah. Dave, I mentioned earlier that you so generously share everything you do in your own life on your website, which is davepascoe.net. And of course, we'll share that information in the show notes. You share and it was, I have to tell you, it's overwhelming. And so I'm going to ask you a question about how to navigate through it. But you share your interventions, your daily routines, your meal plans, your supplement list, as well as details about how you manage a colossal inventory of supplements, which that part of it really stood out for me, and it made me, it sort of resonated with me, made me smile a little bit. But you also share your personal care products, and you had mentioned that the toxins and just everyday products that we use and don't even think about, biohacking and fitness tools and much more. It's I don't know how long it would take to read all of it. I read quite a bit of it, and it took me quite a long time to do the part of it that I did. How do you recommend that we navigate through your site, that our listeners and viewers navigate through your site? And what can we all do to make thoughtful, systematic changes over time? Because I know this isn't something, everything that's on your website, you didn't create that or map that out, and then you got to the starting line of day one and you launched all of that at once. So how do we take that elephant that's your website and break it down so that we can ingest it in small bites?
Well, I really appreciate your framing of it as overwhelming, because you're not the first person I've heard that from. That seems to be the common consensus of anyone that's looked at my website. And I totally get that.
Well, and you know what happens when people get overwhelmed by something. They move on to the next thing. Yeah. And so if we can somehow figure out a way to chunk that down, or again, take that in bite-sized pieces or baby steps or however you want to describe it, that's how we make an impact. That's how we make change. It's like you mentioned your marathon training, and I'm pretty sure that you didn't go out the first time you wanted to run a marathon and run down your driveway and then run 26 miles to train for it, right?
Exactly.
You may have just run to the end of your driveway that first day. And then maybe after the day after that, or maybe you had a rest day the day after that. And then you ran down to the corner, and then you had a rest day. And then the next day you ran a little bit further. And so I think in order for this to work, we're going to have to do the same thing with the incredible volume of information that you've provided about how to impact our health and vitality day to day, and then hopefully and maybe even lengthen our life and certainly the quality of our life.
Yeah, you've made the perfect analogy, because on my website, I've pretty much laid out the totality of the marathon, right? But that's not the way anyone would approach a marathon. You don't just start doing all of it all at once. And I certainly didn't either. I mean, I started with, just little pieces of what I thought I could do, and then tried that on for size and tried it out for a few weeks. And once it became a habit, I thought, well, what else can I add into this? And added that in and tried that for a while until that became a habit. And so I started really just with habit stacking. And I think that's what I would recommend anybody to do as far as approaching my website. I mean, use it as a guide for what's possible. You don't have to do all those things, and certainly shouldn't try doing all of those things right off the bat. Just pick something in there that maybe speaks to you, that you think that you could try, and just try one or two of the ideas that are posted there and see how they feel, and go from there. And just, again, it's all out there for ideas. I've had people tell me that, gosh, you could sell this as a program. Why don't you? And the reason I don't is because when I was initially looking for this kind of information, I could not find it. I mean, it was out there, but it was behind a paywall, and I certainly couldn't afford to pay for that. And I don't want other people to have to be subjected to that either. Yeah, it's overwhelming. It's all there. It's all for free, though. And so it's up to you how you want to approach it. Again, I recommend tiny little pieces at a time, but it's all there. It's all for free. And so if you don't find the value in it, don't do it. I can't convince anybody to do anything they don't want to do, but I put it all there. If you're a seeker and you're really trying to find what's possible, then all that information is there.
What are the caveats for people who are just getting started? Or maybe to put it another way, what are the biggest mistakes you see people making when they try to imitate elite biohackers or watch the Netflix documentary and go out and try to run the marathon, so to speak, all in their first time out?
Yeah, it's jumping to all of the sexy things, right? It's the plasmapheresis. It's all the supplements. Like I had a guy send me a picture once via Instagram of his kitchen countertop, which I was looking at thinking, how did this guy get a picture of my kitchen countertop? Because what he had done is he went out and purchased every single supplement that I had listed on my website. And I was horrified because this was a young guy. He was like in his 20s. And I saw the supplements I'm taking, like, DHEA and pregnenolone. And I'm thinking, this guy, he's 20 years old. He doesn't need that. That was horrifying to me. And that's why I put a lot of disclaimers out of my website that you can't just guess at these things. What you really need to do, and this is what I do, I recommend everybody do, is start with a simple blood test, right? I mean, it can be difficult sometimes to get your doctor to give you a blood test because most doctors won't run a blood test unless there's something wrong with you. That's the way the system's built, right? There has to be a problem that they're trying to diagnose, and then they'll run just the minimal blood test that they can to try to figure out that one little thing that's troubling you. But we don't have to rely on that today because there are consumer-based blood labs that we can order ourselves and get. And that's what I do. I don't subscribe to any, I don't say that you should subscribe to any particular vendor or lab, but there are many options out there. And just getting a simple, what's called a comprehensive metabolic panel, or as a CMP or a CBC, those will just tell you your basic blood biomarkers. Just start there. Look and see, are there things that, in my blood that are out of whack? Is my cholesterol really high? Are my liver enzymes not looking appropriate? What do my hormones look like? Those are things that we all should be interested in and be curious about. And I would say start there. If you're going to be doing supplementation at all, look at the things that are out of the reference range and start looking at how you could put those or bring those back into alignment with the reference range. That would be a good starting point for anyone.
Beyond the looking at blood work and gleaning information from that and reacting to that with supplements or other ways to bring those back to normal levels, are there certain metrics we should focus on that provide the best data for long-term health and vitality? What are the things that you're paying attention to that aren't the elite biohacker metrics? They're maybe the same metrics that you've been monitoring for the last, say, 5 or 10 years.
Well, I'd also recommend that people get some sort of fitness tracker. I happen to be wearing 3. I have an Oura Ring, I'm wearing a Whoop, and a Garmin. So there's 3 different things that are basically tracking some of the same things. I also have an 8 sleep cooling heating pad in my bed that also tracks my sleep. So I have no shortage of things. I also wear another sleep tracking ring. But just knowing what your sleep is actually like, I mean, for many people, they don't even have a clue. They know how many hours they're in bed, but how many hours of that are you actually getting, restorative sleep? That's the deep sleep plus REM sleep. Those are things that you should be looking into because, again, that's how you would ward off, anything like, Alzheimer's and dementia from a lack of good sleep. You might even find that you have something that's impacting your sleep. Maybe you might have some sort of hypopnea or sleep apnea that's affecting your ability to stay asleep or your breathing while you're asleep. And those kind of things can impact your health. They're things that we don't know about because we're unconscious, right? But you need some sort of tracker to be able to look into those things and tell you. And so you need to be able to be curious and not afraid of what the data might tell you, because the data is what's going to help you to turn that around. What you don't know, you can't fix.
That's well said. I appreciate you sharing that. And I noticed on your site that you also share your Audible book, and you mentioned that you listen to audiobooks using Audible, and you have your full book list on your website as well as your podcast and YouTube subscriptions.
I'm behind in updating both of those, actually.
Okay, well, that's your homework for today then.
It is, yes.
What role does consumption of information play? I know you're a learner. I know you are a voracious reader, voracious consumer of information, and you've talked about that. Not just for the sake of consuming information, but to learn and find new ways to improve, whatever that looks like in every area of life. What role does that play in longevity and just general health? And what kinds of books and other information do you recommend consuming?
Yeah, I would say that the knowledge without application is just trivia. And to me, that's worthless. So anytime I'm consuming knowledge, it's to find how can I apply this to my life? What can I do to improve with this information? So that's always what I'm reading or listening, looking for, is what might I consider doing next that I haven't considered already? And my website and my journey is a continuing, growing pattern. So it's not a fixed document. I'm always going to be changing things. Like my entire supplement protocol, I've recently just completely revamped. And so because the knowledge, or I should say that the information that's out there is also very overwhelming. There's so many sources now of information. Again, at one point, I mentioned in this discussion that I was listening to podcasts from the moment I would wake up to the moment I went to bed. I now no longer can get through all of the podcasts that I listen to in that time frame, even though I'm not listening at normal speed. I learned to listen at 2 times normal speed, and eventually 2.5, and eventually 3 times normal speed. Now I'm listening at 3.5 times normal speed of these podcasts and these books, which my friends laugh at me. They're like, that's just noise. How do you understand this doesn't make sense. So they get in my car, they're like, what was that sound? And I'm like, what do you mean? That was a podcast. And they're like, no, it was screeching. And I'm like, no, that was a person talking. I've learned to be able to understand that over time. And there's so many things that we can do if you just take the first step and keep working toward it. But again, all that has become overwhelming for me. So what I'm doing now is I've relied a lot on artificial intelligence. There are so many different AIs out there now that can help to go and, read the information and summarize it, and then give me emails each day of what they find that, might be interesting in summary form. So I'm not wasting time reading entire PubMed research articles myself. The AIs are helping with that. And I use like Perplexity, I use Claude, ChatGPT, and Google Gemini now. I try to use all of them, and I'm constantly asking them questions. And now they're getting to the point where I'm not even having to ask anymore. They know the kind of things I'm interested in, and they're even starting to recommend things for me. So it's just an exciting time to be alive, actually.
Well, it's a super exciting time, and there's more information being produced every minute probably than ever before by a multiple of who knows how much, thousands probably. And the reality is we can't consume all the information, right? Even around if we looked at biohacking or the toxin aspect of health and longevity, there's still we have way more information than we can possibly consume in a lifetime, even with the help of AI. And so there again, it requires just being focused on what it is that we want to learn, and then doing it one bite at a time. I think, I don't know if you've experienced this. I certainly have, where in the pursuit of knowledge, I think the mental health impact of that ends up not being healthy because we're trying to consume information at a rate that is that just exceeds what we're capable of, and that creates other issues. But the good news is there is a lot of information out there. AI can help to bring that together, to consolidate that, to curate that. And if you go to Dave's website, you can see a list to get you started. There's definitely no shortage of resources that just pick one and get started. Dave, I remember meeting you formally a couple years ago, maybe a little bit longer. And the reason I remember the occasion clearly is that you told me when we met that you listened to the show, to Life Excellence. And I asked you a question, and I've actually stopped asking this question because I didn't want to make it awkward for people, didn't want to put people on the spot, because I found that was happening when I asked this particular question. But this was before I learned that. And so I asked, you told me that you listened to the show, and I asked, which episodes have you listened to? And I think at the time we had done maybe 20 or 25. And your answer actually shocked me because you said all of them. Yeah. And I've always been grateful for that support. And it's part of the reason that I'm so excited to have you on the show. And I hope that you're still listening to the show. And it's such an honor and a pleasure to have you. And Dave, you obviously know our show is called Life Excellence. And I know you strive for excellence in your life. And I wonder, what does excellence mean to you?
We've already kind of touched upon that, but I would say excellence is kind of like looking at the totality of that marathon. And instead of being overwhelmed, just look at it as, what's the next step that I can take? Because really, when you break it down to its components, it's just a simple, one step after another. So excellence to me is being able to just look at the most basic, like, what's the next step or the first step that I can take today toward improving my life in any one way that I can think of for today, and taking that step, just that one step. And if you or anyone, myself included, looks at excellence in that way, just taking one step at a time, you'd be really surprised how far you can go in a week or a month or even a year, or when you look back at a decade and say, oh my gosh, wow, I've come so far from where I was before. But excellence to me is taking those steps and not being afraid.
I love that answer. And so what I hear embedded in that is that excellence isn't getting the medal after you finish the marathon. It's maybe that going on that very first day from your front door to the end of the driveway, or the third day going around the block, or the 10th week of training where you do run that 7-mile distance that you've never even come close to running before. It's those steps that you're talking about along the way. And I agree, that is excellence. It doesn't tend to be how people define it. They tend to define it as the end result because that's what we see. We see the person, the Olympic athlete standing on the podium receiving the gold medal, or we see the person who finished the race, or we see the person who, the musician or the actor who gets the award. But in fact, it's all of those things that put them in a position to receive those accolades that's true excellence, isn't it?
Yeah, it's knowing that you're not great today. You're not going to be perfect, and that's completely okay. You have to be very comfortable with sucking at things, right? We have to start somewhere, and every day is a new journey. Every day is a new beginning. So we're always starting from scratch every day. don't be ashamed of that. Don't be afraid of that. Embrace that, and see what next step you can take. It's kind of exciting.
Oh, it's very exciting. Dave, even before you and I met formally, I knew about your considerable investment of time and money and energy in invested in those in need in our local community and around the world. And you serve so graciously in a number of ways in our church, and that's very visible to me and others. And I'm sure you're serving in many other ways that I'm not aware of. We've talked about the influence of factors like diet and exercise and toxins on aging and longevity. But how much does service and giving back impact what we're talking about? And for that matter, what impact does anything that gives our lives purpose and meaning have on health and vitality and slowing aging and extending longevity?
Well, it's funny. It's probably one of the better kept secrets that the more you give, the more you actually receive. It's kind of mind-boggling when you think about it. I didn't always live my life that way. I kind of had to step out in faith and learn to trust how I was being led. And I learned that along the way, that, giving is not completely selfless. It fills your cup as much as it helps other people.
And I know you don't do it for that reason. That's a gift that you receive on the back end that it's a beautiful thing. And I've seen it, and I've seen it in you, and I appreciate you for that. Dave, thanks so much for being on the show. It's great to see you as always, and I really appreciate the just a ton of information that you've shared, and that you've shared both on the show and, of course, on your website. And I'll just say that again, but again, we'll put it in the show notes at davepascoe.net. There is really everything you need there to become an elite biohacker, probably, but certainly to improve the quality of your life, to enhance your health and mental fitness and vitality, and maybe even live a little bit longer too. Thanks again for everything, Dave.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for tuning into Life Excellence. Please support the show by subscribing, sharing it with others, posting about today's show with Dave Pascoe on social media, and leaving a rating and review. You can also learn more about me at bryanbartes.com. Until next time, dream big dreams and make each day your masterpiece.